Kia ora koutou, I'm Rachel. Welcome back to my channel where I talk about well-being and activism. Hopefully you saw from the title that this is a part two. If you haven't seen the first one about narcissist activists and the different ways that they can show up in our scene, then I recommend going back and watching that one first, because this one will make a whole lot more sense. I'd actually filmed that last one and most of what you'll see in this one in a few minutes in one big go, but it was too long and I had some problems, so I've split them up. So before I get into this part, which is about how we usually kind of respond to these narcissistic personality types, I really wanted to just say thank you for the people who commented on that last video, either here on YouTube or on Facebook. That really means a lot to me. But I sort of have looked at YouTube for years, and it wasn't really until I started making my own videos that I realized how important people commenting really is. So if you feel shy about commenting, please just say hello. It doesn't, I'm often calling on these videos for specific kinds of comments, but it doesn't have to be those, like you can just say what you liked about it, or if you learnt something, or if you disagree with me, or you're confused about what I'm saying. Any of those things are really awesome as well. Or even just, pushing like or something, letting me know that these videos are of use. Because I'm still just new here and deciding if this actually works for other people. Yeah, so I'm just going to flick over now to the pre-recorded one, and I'll see you at the end as this version of me. What I wanted to talk about now is how I think we usually try to deal with these kind of difficult personality types in our movements. And I think that there's three main ways. This is just really my observation. I don't know if it's backed up by any kind of research. But I think there's three kind of ways, and I think that typically they kind of progress from one to the other, but people, I guess, might just stay in one of those. And that's, I think the first one that we so often fall into initially is, I was going to say love, or something like love, but I might flip that and call it something more like fawning. I'm not really sure the right word here, but I think that a lot of us might sense that somebody who is seeking a lot of attention and stuff like that is somebody who maybe doesn't love themselves enough, or needs a lot of attention, or needs a lot of lifting up and stuff. And so especially because narcissists can often go into a rage when things don't go their way, and so the tendency can be to be like, oh well, we just need to care for this person more, we just need to let them know that they're valued. Yeah, just kind of a caring, accepting, I see you, I know that you have needs kind of approach. But part of that, and this is the reason I say fawn, is I think another part of that, because narcissists do so much undermining and either like overt or subtle ways of telling the people around them that they're not good enough, and that they aren't as good as them, and this kind of sort of belittling and stuff like that a lot of us can also fall into the thing at the same time, even maybe as the kind of loving, caring approach of trying to prove to the narcissist that actually, that we are good enough, we are as good at activists as them, or we deserve to be here, or we work hard, or we're also virtuous, like that. And that's one of the interesting, and I think this is why narcissists can actually not just be difficult to deal with, but actually have an impact on the whole culture of our scene. Is like, say, with that virtue signaling, if somebody's hard out virtual signaling all the time, then we can easily fall into a pattern of trying to prove that we are also good enough feminists, or we're also real revolutionaries or real anarchists, or really care about the planet or whatever. And so we fall into a trap of trying to just work harder to prove that we belong. And that of course means that then you're sort of creating a whole tribe of people, a whole collection of people that are sort of signaling to anybody new who comes in that to belong they also need to do this. And that can get really yucky and bad for our well-being and our ability to rest and sleep and all those things I talk about on this channel. So I think that's something we need to think about very deeply. And so yeah, the virtual signaling stuff. And something that I just really hit me hard in the middle of the night last night when I was thinking about this is I think it's really easy for us to believe that we do need super women. Oh, I want to just back to the communal narcissist thing. The reason I was saying she's so amazing is because in general 80%, they say about, again, this is just estimates, but they say about 80% of narcissists are men, with 20% being women, particularly because of the way that men are socialized to be sort of assertive and seeking of sort of applause and material gain and all those things in our society, in our dominant society at least. But it's interesting because communal narcissists, they say about 2/3 of communal narcissists are women. And that makes sense too, because like women are socialized to care for others more than themselves and stuff. So it's interesting that women who have this childhood injury, this narcissistic core personality of shame, and need to protect that with something, a false self, that false self comes out looking very about serving others. Anyway, so backing up again to what I was saying about like the superwoman type, that we kind of need these heroes, that our movements would fall down and fall apart if we didn't have these people who were just so dedicated and just give everything, and you can't question them because they're so amazing, they're holding everything together. Well, I think that's unhealthy. Like, I think that actually that's not true. Like, what we need, but it's so hard to resist that hero thing and think, well, that is what we need, right? But I think what we actually need is just for everybody to be doing something, towards this change, and everybody to be doing better, and everybody to care, and that it can be as big or as little action as long as we're all in this together. And I think the more that we hang on to this idea that we need these superwomen, or these supermen, these heroic men, to make the change that we need to happen, I think that is a problem for our movements as well. And I think that, again, if we're always comparing ourselves to the people who are the most like that, we can just run ourselves ragged, burn through people too quickly, so our movements are never as full as they could be, because you've got so many people who are just gone off to hide because they're tired and burnt out. And I talk about that a lot in my first 4 videos about advice for new activists, so go check those ones out. I'll link them below. So those are some of the reasons that I think that that we can fall into this kind of let's just love them lots, and let's fawn over them, or let's try to prove that we also belong here kind of mode. And like I say, some people can stay in that mode with these kind of personality types. I think the next place it can go, once a few of us are starting to realize that this person that we work with or is in our collective or whatever is actually making things quite difficult, and things are not working, and it's partly to do with their behavior, I think we can go to process next. And I think in some ways that's not a bad thing, because this is often where, like, especially in little just NGOs that are starting out, or collective, anarchistic kind of collectives or feminist collectives or whatever, or environmentalist collectives, probably so many. This is often when we as individuals or groups might start really exploring process deeply for the first time. Otherwise, you might just sort of be floating along. But then when things get hard, that's when you often like really go and read up about consensus or whatever. And I think a lot of good learning comes out of that. But a few things I think are difficult about that with narcissists. One is that if the narcissist will likely resist the change to process that you're suggesting, partly because you're then changing and controlling the process, and they don't like that. They want to be the ones in control. They don't want to have these sort of rules put around them that they might be hemmed in by or caught out by. And also just the fact that you've suggested it is a problem rather than it coming from them. They're going to feel very threatened by that. And that's one of the things about narcissists, is that they have a very strong sense of you're either with me or you're against me. So as soon as you start disagreeing with narcissists, aside from the fact that they can't be wrong, or because of it maybe, they get into a place of a sense that you're the enemy kind of thing, which of course is really, really difficult for anybody who's trying to come to some kind of consensus as a group based on shared values or differing values that you can come to a middle ground of agreement with, right? Really difficult. But anyway, so they're going to resist that changing process. And they might do that kind of overtly even by being like, oh, come on, we're all experienced activists here. We all know how to do consensus. We don't need to go to a workshop about that, or we don't need to like sit down and have a discussion about that. We've got all this other stuff to do. Or they might just, they might agree with it, but then just drag their heels and like not get around to doing their part in it, or not show up to the workshop, or just create lots of other drama and stuff so you never get to that point of the agenda or whatever. Like there's so many ways that that can be stalled. And I think the other thing with process is that the other way that they can go is that if the process is initiated already or is already kind of established, process isn't a protection against narcissism. Narcissists can use the process to abuse people and lord over other people, especially because there's this whole righteousness thing and this whole virtual signaling thing. Like narcissists can use like non-violent communication and, all the seemingly kind of correct ways, or they'll claim to be doing all the correct things in terms of the process, and be totally finding ways to maintain their power and undermine other people, all those things, right? So, just be aware of that you can spend a lot of time kind of in this place, or, if you're an employee or somebody in a less position of power or whatever, in a collective or whatever, of kind of trying to manage up, and it just, the amount of energy and thought and, this just takes so much time and energy and stuff out of us, so you can spend years in that place, right? So that's another thing that I think that we go to that doesn't always pay off. It might in some situations, and again, I'd love to hear people's thoughts if you've been through this stuff and found really good process or really good ways that that's worked. That's really choice. But in my experience, it can be really, really disheartening. And so the sort of the third place that I think that people often get to, and like I say, these might not exactly happen in order, but I think that often they can go in these 3 steps, is the third place is once somebody or a group of people has realized that this person is like all of these sort of really difficult things about narcissists, like unable to accept accountability, just doing all of, gaslighting people and manipulating people and being really cruel to people and just digging in their heels and moving from one collective to another, being abusive to people, basically. That's where we can get really rageful ourselves and so fed up, and that's where I think that we just want to, it's kind of the outrage place or whatever, you know, that's the place where we just want to bring them down and we want to tell them what jerks we know them to be, and we want everybody else to know about it. There's particularly a thing that people who have experienced narcissistic abuse really, really have a strong sense of justice and want to really out that person who's been abusive to them so that this doesn't happen to anybody else. And that can mean, really sort of, wanting to tell everyone about it, starting fights with them, and really just being to a point too where we're sort of fed up and emotional, so we lose our shit. And natural, been there. But it's really interesting that the advice from all the people who really know stuff about narcissism, they all say don't get into the mud with them because it's not worth it. It seems like it's going to be good to really call them out and have that fight with them, but narcissists are always going to be the better fighter. You're going to get down into the mud with them and it's going to get really, really dirty, like way dirtier than you could have ever imagined, even knowing that they're a total jerk to begin with. They, like I say, that sense of you're with me or against me, the contempt that they have for people, and just the fact, like this thing of wanting to call them out to other people and everyone to, sing from the rooftops what a jerk they are. You're never going to have total success with it. I say never. There are probably some great examples of when people really, really meet accountability, and you can see that in the Me Too movement. But in general, with us in the everyday sort of narcissist, it's difficult to do that, because as soon as you start disagreeing and challenging a narcissist, they're already going to start laying the foundations with people around you that you're the problem. I think they call this flying monkeys in the sort of narcissism expertise world. They'll create a lot of, they'll create a lot of doubt in the people around you, about where you're coming from and challenging them or criticizing them in any way. And so then when you're finally losing your shit at them, there's going to be all these people who are like, oh yeah, that she told me that they were a little bit unhinged or whatever. And they, like, narcissists will say all kinds of really, really terrible stuff, and they can be, because manipulation and lying and stuff comes very naturally to them. It's part of their general MO. They're good at it, they're convincing, and so a lot of people around them will believe them when they hear them say the most outrageous stuff about people. They're often things that, if you know the person well that they're talking about, you'll be like, well, hang on, that doesn't actually fit with their motivations at all. But if you don't know that person so well, or if there are some things about that person that might be imperfect, like we're all imperfect, you can, it's easy for people to start to wonder. The reason that the experts in this stuff say just don't bother is because that's such, narcissists are just typically such dirtier fighters. It won't feel worth it. They'll throw so much shit at you, both to your face and to other people, that it'll just it's just basically not worth the drama. And the thing that it took me a long time to learn as well is that you're actually feeding their narcissistic supply by engaging with them in this way. They get off on seeing the emotional reaction from you, and then they're also getting sort of narcissistic supply by all the people that'll be comforting them and that they'll be going to talking about, how awful you've been to them. And this whole thing of, just as sort of an aside as well, of the flying monkeys and the way that narcissists, even before, like I say, even before it gets to the fight stage, even just when you're raising concerns and stuff, people who are like this will start sort of feeding their supporters these ideas that you're this really terrible person. And the gross thing about that is, I think that that's part of the reason why to a lot of us who may never even realize that this person is a narcissist, and and we're a genuine supporter of theirs, and we've maybe never seen their yuckier side. We can end up being left feeling like our scene is full of all these horrible, horrible people, because this person's always telling us about all of these horrible, horrible things that all these people around us, are doing and thinking and are motivated by. And often that simply isn't true. It's another thing that narcissistic people are characterized by is projection. And so if you find that the same, a person who you really admire in your scene is always telling you all these awful things about people who have criticized them, I think it's worth starting to wonder, is that really true of all those other people, or is this person actually just projecting onto all those other people their own kinds of ways of thinking? Because narcissists are very out for themselves and manipulative and controlling and all those things, they'll project that onto other people and be like, that person can't be trusted because they're actually just got this ulterior motive. Start to wonder, do all of these people around us have all these ulterior motives, or is it just this person who keeps telling me that? Like I say, I think that our scenes can feel a lot more toxic than they really are. So, yeah, having thought about all those different ways that we respond, like, with lots of care, and then with lots of careful managing or process, and then, just with rage, you might be left thinking, well, what do we actually do? That seems to cover a lot of the bases. I know there's been a 2-week gap, so if you've all got out and watched a bunch of Dr. Ramani's videos like I suggested, you probably know what I'm going to say next, which is that what all the narcissist experts recommend is that you try to come at these relationships with these difficult people with radical acceptance and realistic expectations. And for me, that means knowing that you can't change them, and slowing down and stepping back from the kind of treadmill you can get into of trying to maybe walk on eggshells around them so that they don't go into rage or undermine you or whatever, trying to please them, or trying to battle them and bring them down, or whichever stage you're at kind of thing, or trying to manage them, like trying all those things that I just was talking about. And also in between that, not spending so much time and energy just thinking about all of the shitty things that they do to you, like Dr. Ramani, I don't know if you've seen it already, but if you haven't, check it out. Dr. Ramani has a great video about the way that continuing to be surprised by narcissistic people gives them more power than we should, and is so exhausting and emotional. It just keeps us on that emotional roller coaster, and that's where the radical acceptance and the realistic expectation comes in. That instead of every time they do some new shitty thing being like, who does that? I can't believe they would do that, and why would they treat me that way, and do I really deserve to be treated this way, and wait a minute, that is wrong, right? Like, am I doubting myself to, like, am I in the wrong here? Like all of that emotional shit that you can go through, the stress that it causes you every time. That's such an energy suck, eh? And so instead trying to get to a place of just being like, yep, there they go again. Of course they would do that. That's what they do. And that means that, like I say, that you can just, aside from not being so upset by it and so hurt by it and so thrown around by it, you can also just ease up on yourself and not feel like you need to manage their ways of being so much. You don't need to be, trying to get everything right so that they don't be an arsehole, basically. It's about just leaving their behavior with them and being like, this is just going to happen sometimes, The other sort of part, I guess, is deciding, well, what are you going to do with that now that you've recognize that this is the reality. You know, are you going to stay in the situation, or are you going to go? Either way, that thing of radical acceptance is going to help you to leave or to manage how you are with that person going forward. I think if we're talking about, you know, kind of activist collectives, things that we're doing volunteer, I think that once you sort of develop that radical acceptance, that's a good time to think about leaving. I guess I want to sort of share personally how much I know that it can be really, really hard to give up on a cause that you feel really passionate about. And everyone's going to have to make their own decision around that. That's part of the reason I've been sort of saying over and over in this channel that, you know, don't forget that this group is not the only way that you can do that work. You know, you can find other places to do that work. The thing that I guess I want to caution people with in terms of staying in a group that has somebody who's got these really difficult behaviours, is that, I guess from my experience, I've stayed in groups too long that have been bad for me, or jobs that have been bad for me because of these kind of personalities, because I've cared about the issue. But then I notice now that by the time I'd become burnt out and moved on to different things, that I've created some pretty big shadows within myself around those issues that I've been burnt out from, where some of the helplessness and hopelessness that you can fall into when you're around narcissistic people, that connects too strongly for me to the cause as well, like a sense of hopelessness and helplessness around those causes, or also a resentment around those causes too. So instead of, you know, like things that I once cared lots about, I can feel kind of a weird, yucky, confused kind of like, oh well, fuck that kind of attitude. And it's not because I no longer care about that issue, it's because my experiences have been so bad with people around that issue. And so that can take quite a bit of untangling, and that's something that I'm still working on, and that I'm hoping that this channel helps with. So I guess just as a cautionary thing, just be aware that can creep in and happen when you don't even know it's happening. So yeah, I guess that's just my little pitch for, if you care about the issue, leaving might actually help you to care about the issue for longer. But yeah, so developing this thing of radical acceptance is about protecting yourself, and it also is about how you manage that narcissistic person. So the other thing that Dr. Ramani is always talking about is trying to cultivate an attitude of indifference, and that comes from that radical acceptance, an attitude of indifference to this person's behavior, whether it's sort of attention-seeking stuff and you know, sort of they're so wonderful, and not sort of buying into the feeding their ego kind of thing in terms of how wonderful they are, but also an indifference to their negative behaviors that can impact on you. And what that does is it actually, yeah, it's not the same as kind of like the hopelessness thing that you can kind of get into, which has almost the same kind of indifference thing. It's a more empowered kind of indifference, where you know you're doing it deliberately, and you know that it's to keep yourself safe and to starve them of narcissistic supply. And what I like about this approach, aside from the fact that it seems to be what works, and I've found that it works in my dealing with people who have these behaviours, in terms of keeping myself safe and stuff, is that for me it's really easy. It was really easy for a long time to feel quite worried about calling people narcissistic, or like bringing an issue like this to to a platform like this, and you know, encouraging people to think about narcissism and our scenes, because I don't want something like narcissism to get thrown around as kind of a, you know, a weaponized term in the way that I've seen abuser or toxic, or these kind of terms are often thrown at people. Often people who are just opinionated or bringing up issues that people don't want to hear or whatever, often naming oppressions and stuff, right? I don't want narcissism, like they're a narcissist, to become that same thing. But what I like about this sort of indifference approach is that it's not starting drama, it's not attacking people, it's just stepping back from drama that's happening. And I think, yeah, that if this person that you're finding really difficult isn't a narcissist, they just have some really difficult behavior, then being indifferent to that behavior is also helpful. And if they aren't a narcissist, being indifferent to their abusive behavior isn't gonna, you know, hurt them any, because it's only narcissists who need that sort of supply. So what this kind of indifference means in practical terms is trying not to hook into the different ways that they'll try to get narcissistic supply from you. And so that can be in big ways or little ways. And so, for example, narcissists can be very critical, or either directly or sort of subtle implied criticisms or digs or guilt trips. And there's a tendency in the way that we respond to that to try to explain ourselves and try to defend ourselves and show, and that could be open and really blatant attacks as well, of course, as well as the subtle ones. And one of the things that Dr. Ramani says, and other people in this field, is don't explain yourself, don't take it personally, don't defend yourself, just don't engage with it. It's about just, just leaving all of that stuff with them. And that's really hard to do. It's so easy to fall back into wanting to defend yourself, fall back into engaging with their stuff. But it's about, over time, just practicing this art of not engaging. And one of the ways that people do that is they talk about this sort of a symbolic idea of grey rock, and just thinking about trying to present yourself as a grey rock. You're not, you know, you're just kind of forgettable. You're just this, like a grey rock that people would walk past on the street or the beach or wherever and think nothing of. You know, you're not giving any response, not positive or negative. It can be, you know, if it's somebody that you're working with, or an acquaintance that you need to still remain cordial with for whatever reason. It can be friendly, it can be upbeat even. It's not a punishy, sort of sulky, cold shouldery kind of indifference. It's just neutral. And if it helps, you know, you can have an actual physical grey rock, like a little one like this that's easy to tuck in your pocket, or if you like something with a bit more weight, something a bit heavier that you can keep on your desk, or like I say, in your pocket or on your pot plant or whatever at work. Somewhere subtle that you can see it, that you know is there, maybe that's next to where you read your emails, depending on what your situation is, to just help remind yourself to just remain indifferent. And the way that I've found really useful to try to get into this state of mind, like I said in the last video, I did go through 3 or 4 years of therapy talking about this stuff and unpacking it and stuff, so that was quite intensive. But more recently, I've also, like, even after all of that, I still found it hard to, like, really keep this in the forefront of my mind when dealing with people who have these kind of traits. And I really found it so useful just watching a lot of those Dr. Ramani videos. You know, she's got that playlist about 30 Days of Narcissism where she's just talking about the different characteristics. And I found it really useful. They're quite short, to just listen to 1 or maybe 2 of those every day for about a month, to just really kind of really let it sink in. Because you can get this stuff on an intellectual level, but to really let it sink in to your full heart and your emotions and all the different aspects of it, Yeah, I found that really helpful. So you might find that helpful as well, to just, yeah, let the reality of it sink in. And I want to say though, if you do a similar thing, that emotions will come up, and same with the, grey rock. If you're dealing with narcissistic people ongoingly, you want to try to appear indifferent and don't share your negative emotions with them or whatever, but you still are going to feel negative emotions, and don't try to just dampen those down and pretend they don't exist. You need to still take them and release them somewhere else. And I recommend seeing that video that I did about completing stress cycles to do with this, and I'll link that below, because you don't want to hold that shit in your body. Let that stuff out somewhere appropriately. And yeah, so I recommend that sort of approach. And I think the other thing is too, is then spend some time, yeah, if you've been through narcissistic abuse and stuff, spend some time healing you and looking after you, and noticing all of the energy and beauty in your authentic self that is there and sort of freed up once you're not putting so much energy and thought into yeah, coping with this person's behavior or managing that person. It's actually amazing. And again, I found a Dr. Ramani video on this really helpful, where she talked about like what a big energy suck narcissistic people are. It's actually amazing the energy that they take, and the huge amount of energy, intellectual and emotional energy, that's released after you're no longer dedicating so much to them. And I find that idea really, really exciting, because I think a lot of us have had that experience where we've been involved in activism and we've found it a huge drain. And it doesn't have to be that way, like I know that there are so many people watching this who have so much they really care about, and if we can just use our energy to dedicate to those things that we're really passionate about, instead of getting bogged down with these difficult people, like, think of what we could do, we'll be so powerful. So yeah, do the healing you need to do and celebrate that. And the reason I say do the healing you need to do too is I just want to say, narcissists have this typical pattern of devaluing and discarding people. And I've felt it myself, where I felt, in a particular workplace or collective, like over time, somebody who seemed to value my work at the beginning, and who I thought I was really giving something to this project, and it was my project as well, and this is a shared thing that we are passionate about and are giving to, that by the end of it, it was very clear that no, I wasn't important at all. I was completely replaceable. This was their passion project. It was always going to be their project. It will continue to be theirs, and it was never mine, and I'm just nothing in it. And now I look back and I realize that is about that pattern. And I've seen that happen in workplaces and projects as well. Not just to me, but to friends of mine and stuff and colleagues and people who I know are amazing and have so much to bring. And it's so wrong and so heartbreaking to see. But it's like with all of this narcissist stuff, once you realize that it's just textbook, you can let go of a lot of that and be like, look, that's just narcissists doing their thing, and try not to carry so much of it around in terms of the value that you have to bring to the things that you're passionate about. So, yeah, that's another area that I really, really encourage people to look at and do some work around if you've had that experience of being devalued and discarded like that. What else did I want to say? I think that's just about me. I guess the only other thing is that I really, really recommend checking out the Dr. Ramani stuff, and maybe some other resources on narcissism as well. The thing that I find a little bit frustrating about them though is that, of course, because they're clinical psychologists who their main focus is about the individual and their recovery and their relationships, as somebody who's come from a lot of background in different sort of more collective projects, I find it a little bit frustrating that there isn't some kind of offering in terms of how do we as a group, or a culture or a community or whatever our collectives are, a whānau, an extended family, how do we prevent this kind of abuse from happening, and how do we respond to it when it's happening as a collective rather than just as individuals? I should say too though, one thing that Dr. Ramani says that I really like is that You know, the idea of not hooking into arguments and stuff like that, remaining indifferent when narcissists are throwing a lot of shit at you, that applies to when it's happening to you. But she still encourages people, you know, if you're seeing a narcissist abusing another person, that it's still worth saying that's not okay the way that you're talking to them, you know, and saying to the person who's been abused, I see that this is happening to you, and it's not okay, and you don't deserve to be treated this way, because it won't change the narcissist's behavior, or you know, and likely you'll get be prepared for a lot of abuse your way straight afterwards. But it's for the person who's been abused, you know. They deserve to hear that you can see what's happening and stuff. And narcissistic abuse can be really isolating. So yeah, just so that we're not all sitting around kind of enabling that abuse to happen. So there's an element of bystander stuff, I guess, or how we might respond as well. But yeah, it still kind of leaves me wanting a little bit in terms of, yeah, how do we as collectives respond? And you know, I suppose I can sort of think, oh well, this is how I'm going to respond from now on to narcissists. Oh, and this is just a little aside, but something I just remembered I wanted to mention is that the great thing about all this deep learning about narcissists and all the shitty experiences you've had with narcissists is that once you've learned all this and you've sort of learned the grey rock technique, when you meet new narcissists come into your life, you can much more quickly just grey rock them. Then they won't find anything interesting about you. They'll just move on very quickly, and you'll save yourself a lot of drama in the future. So that's a beautiful thing, and hopefully, you know, if we all, I'm bringing a video like this to you for the hope that if we all can start doing that as collectives, if we can all talk about narcissism more, if we can understand it, if we can share information about it, if we can learn how to respond to it as individuals, then at least that's something that helps us kind of create more resilient communities. But yeah, like I say, the question's still sort of there for me, and I would love to have that conversation. I think I'll keep coming back to this in later videos, and I'd love to have that conversation with you in the comments or other spaces, you know. If you have thoughts or experiences and stuff, or yeah, resources, please share them, because I think that we could do better as communities around this stuff. But yeah, like I say, the other thing I guess I wanted to mention is that I think in a lot of these videos, the last one and in this one, there's almost a sort of a gleeful, excited child in me talking about this stuff, which might seem quite inappropriate when I'm talking about stuff that can be really awful. And if you're right in the thick of it, I know it's awful. And sorry if that feels inappropriate. It's just the fact that for me, so much joy has come from being released from carrying all the stuff, and yeah, I just want to put out there the excitement that I have for the futures that we can have released of all of this, and the energy that we can have to share with each other, and yeah, the projects that are meaningful to us. So thanks so much for listening to both these really long videos. Again, love to hear from you in the comments, and take care. Noho ora mai.